Racist cop frames, black teen, then freezes when she's a legal prodigy. Just by standing in the wrong place, holding the wrong book, your skin can become the indictment. Before we dive into this story, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hill Ridge, a residential neighborhood in the northern part of Lexington, Kentucky, is a place where lawns are trimmed to precision down to the centimeter, where summer maples are watered through underground systems, and white SUVs line the sidewalks like a parade formation. Here, 96% of the residents are white. The median household income surpasses $210,000 a year. It is a land of regulated quiet, of polite surveillance, and of invisibility reserved for anyone who doesn't belong. On that Wednesday morning, an unusual image appeared on the sidewalk of 82nd Street. A 17-year-old black girl, carrying a heavy silver-gray backpack, stood silently at a bus stop, like an ink blot on a pristine printed page. She wasn't on the phone, wasn't wearing headphones, no hoodie, no suspicious gestures. She just stood there, quietly, holding a thick book with a silver-lettered cover. The Constitution and the Federal Judiciary. Her name was Dessie Allen, a senior in high school who had just submitted her final essay for a national scholarship worth $80,000. A program in which only 0.02% of applicants made it to the final round. In her 3,217-word paper, she analyzed the Fourth Amendment and its role in protecting people of color from arbitrary searches. But no one in Hill Ridge knew that. And Clinton Donnelly, a police officer with 17 years of service in this area, certainly didn't. He stopped his patrol car as he passed her. At first, he meant to drive on. But then, he circled back. Something didn't feel right, he later wrote in his report. A professional instinct, as he called it. He stepped out of the car, eyes scanning Dessie like a system designed to detect errors. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of shackles. What are you doing here? The question wasn't seeking an answer. It was a claim of ownership, from someone who had always assumed this place belonged to him. Dessie turned around. Her gaze held no resistance, no fear, only a surprising calm. I'm waiting for the bus. I have a scholarship exam this morning. It was a flawless answer, polite enough not to be seen as defiant, concise enough not to arouse suspicion, but to Clinton, it only made her more suspicious. Let me check your backpack. No reason, no reading of rights, no indication of any wrongdoing. But Clinton's hand had already yanked the zipper before Dessie could react. In the next few seconds, everything she had prepared for over the past 3 months, the test admission slip, copies of her transcript, a draft essay printed in blue ink, was scattered across the burning July pavement. And then, from the spine of the law book, something small fell out. A transparent zip bag containing white powder. Too perfectly placed to be believable, right at page 62 of the book, the page that boldly read, "The Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent." A soft breeze flipped the pages. Clinton's body comm was rolling, exactly as he intended. "What the hell is this?" he growled, holding the powder-filled bag toward the camera like a prop in a staged play. But Dessie didn't look at him. She bent down, picked up her book, and gently smoothed the creased cover. Then she lifted her head, looked directly into Donnelly's chest camera, and in a clear voice said, "The Fifth Amendment. I'm invoking my right to remain silent." And just like that, a girl with a law book in the heart of a town that never expected her began her battle with an entire system. A dark cloud, not of her skin, but of her mind, now loomed over the seemingly flawless sky of Hill Ridge. The coldness of the metal cuffs didn't just tighten around Dessie Allen's wrists. It felt as if it engraved into her skin a prejudice passed down through generations. That black intellect, no matter how sharp, was never allowed to stand quietly in the heart of neighborhoods defined by a different shade of skin. After the zip bag of white powder fell out from her law book, Clinton Donnelly didn't wait for an explanation. There was no protocol, no Miranda rights read, no call for backup. He simply dragged Desi toward the hood of the patrol car. At 9:14 a.m., the sun stood high, and the steel surface of the car reflected a blinding glare. When Desi's head was shoved down, her forehead touched the scorching surface, leaving a faint burn, not deep, but it stung. On her left hand, a blue ink smear had bled from the scholarship essay, now blotched and staining her white shirt. The last page of her paper, titled "The Fourth Amendment and the Limits of Executive Power in a Biased Society," was swept into a roadside drainage ditch by a gust of wind. A corner of the sheet peeked from beneath the shade of a maple tree, as if justice, even when written in reason, still lived on the margins of society. The first to pull out a phone was a middle-aged man on a bicycle, Leor Jensen, a history teacher at the local high school. He recorded from a distance. The audio wasn't clear, but the visuals were sharp enough to capture every movement. A girl who did not resist, being arrested in broad daylight for a book. When the video was posted to Twitter with the caption, "Arrested for reading the wrong book in the wrong place," it surpassed 21,000 views in just 58 minutes. A wave was forming, from an invisible breeze Donnelly didn't even sense. Desi didn't cry, didn't plead her case. She simply lifted her head from the car hood, her gaze not panicked, but sharp, like a blade honed in silence. She asked, slowly, clearly, "Did you record the time you stopped the car?" That question pierced through the clumsy disguise of the entire incident like a needle. Donnelly didn't answer. Instead, he pulled her arms tighter behind her, snapped on the second cuff, and shoved her toward the car door. No arrest warrant, no paperwork, not a single justification for his actions. A woman walking by with her young son, possibly a resident, paused for a few seconds, gripping her purse strap tightly. She looked at her son, then leaned down to whisper, just loud enough for him to hear. "Look closely. Sometimes, being right still won't save you." That sentence, meant as a lesson, sounded more like a sorrowful will. A social worker named Ivy Morales, wearing a gray cardigan, was also present. She stood at a safe distance, didn't intervene, and only quietly typed notes into her phone. Later, in an interview, Ivy admitted, "I was afraid. I've seen people labeled anti-police just for asking a question." Inside her, guilt mixed with helplessness, as if she, too, were a silent link in the chain of complicity. Desi was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car. No words, no request for her name, no demand for ID. As the door slammed shut, her eyes remained fixed outside, where her essay lay in the gutter, and where the legal system she had been taught was meant to protect her had now become a cold, indifferent shackle. As the car pulled away from 82nd Street, what remained wasn't physical evidence, but a video spreading at a rate of 27 shares per minute, the hashtag number "She Read the Constitution," now attached by strangers. No one knew the name Desi Allen yet. No one understood who that girl was. But they had seen her. And in the blinding light of an ordinary morning, a war no one had yet named had officially begun. Not with guns, not with blood, but with a single question that made the entire system flinch. "I'm being arrested, just for knowing the law?" Desi Allen was brought to Precinct 3 of the Lexington West Police Station at 10:02 a.m. Her name was scribbled onto the whiteboard in the hallway. No file number, no legal status noted. No attorney was called. No record was made of the circumstances of her arrest. The entire process hung in ambiguity, as if she were not a real person, but a chaotic variable in a game of power rooted in illusion. Clinton Donnelly entered the interrogation room, removed his cap, and loosened his collar. He grabbed a green marker and began sketching on the whiteboard. A rough scene diagram appeared. The bus stop, the patrol car's position, the suspect's location when spotted, even the direction of sunlight, as if he were constructing a flawless narrative for the report he'd write later. But there was one problem. He drew the bus stop on the east side. Daisy, her wrists still bearing the marks of the handcuffs, looked up. Her voice wasn't sharp, wasn't confrontational, just a precise, unnerving strike of intellect. "You're drawing east. But the bus stop is on the west side of Maple, at the corner with 5th Avenue. There's no morning sunlight there. The surveillance camera from the bank across the street can confirm that." The air in the room dropped, as if everyone had just heard something that wasn't supposed to be said. A young officer behind the frosted glass, Jeremy Yates, 24 years old, fresh out of the academy for just 11 months, glanced up at the drawing, then lowered his gaze. His grip on the pen tightened, lips quivering slightly, caught between conscience and duty. But he said nothing. Because people like him are trained to obey, not to resist. Clinton Donnelly growled, "Are you trying to play lawyer with me?" Desi didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low but piercing, like a needle through silk. Section 20, Clause 7B of the Kentucky Criminal Code. Any discrepancy in location or time that cannot be verified by independent devices invalidates the entire arrest record. She raised her left wrist, showing a scratched, silver-faced Seiko mechanical watch. It was her father, Captain Liam Allen, who wore it through 14 years of service in the military justice system. She continued, her voice steady. "The GPS in my watch, synced with defense satellites, logged police contact at 0958. But your report states 1022. A 24-minute gap without camera support will break the evidentiary chain." Clinton froze, for the first time that morning, no longer triumphant. The security camera in the room captured him looking down at the file, muttering under his breath, "Thinks she knows the law, huh?" What he didn't realize was that the small microphone installed under the table, part of standard interrogation recording protocol, had captured every syllable. Every biased, coercive word he uttered was no longer just speech. It was now evident. Daisy didn't respond to the insult. Instead, she said, "If the police don't have valid evidence, there is no case. No crime." It wasn't a plea. It was an accusation. The 17-year-old girl who had been shoved onto a scorching hood, who had been cuffed in front of a small child walking to school, was now using the very laws she'd studied ever since her father was killed, investigating internal corruption. Using them to strike back. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But it was that very quietness, that precision, that forced an entire room, so used to wielding power to suppress others, to fall silent. It was her first blow, a fracture in their fabricated map they couldn't patch, and from this moment on, the battle would no longer play out on the street, but in a place Donnelly had never known, the courtroom of intellect, of evidence, and ousting he never thought he'd have to face. June 17th, courtroom number 4, Lexington District Court. The temperature outside was 89 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside, the air was as taut as a violin string stretched to its climactic note. To Judge Stephen Mallory's left sat the file for Desi Allen's case, marked JU 4321/minor, probable narcotics possession. Before the public, Desi entered with neatly braided hair, a white blouse, unshackled, but her eyes guarded. She was a juvenile defendant, just 17, no prior record, but carrying within her a fracture not visible, the betrayal of the system. When the judge asked, "Do you have legal representation?" Desi stepped calmly to the podium and replied, "I decline the court-appointed attorney. Under Gideon v. Wainwright, The right to counsel is not mandatory. I will represent myself." The courtroom froze for a moment. Then laughter erupted from the gallery. A black teenager, not even old enough to legally sign a contract, daring to refuse legal protection? Even Judge Mallory, who had presided over more than 700 criminal trials, let out a mocking chuckle. "You think this is a daycare? The courtroom isn't a place to play grown-up." Desi didn't flinch. She opened the file before her, flipping through pages marked with color-coded tabs. She began citing the Fourth Amendment on protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Then the Fifth on the right to remain silent and against self-incrimination. Then the Sixth Amendment on the right to confront one's accuser and to a fair trial. She recited each provision at a steady pace, without stammering, without hesitation, as if she had rehearsed it hundreds of times, not in front of a mirror, but through thousands of hours witnessing the system trample her family. An older man seated in the third row, Franklin Ross, a retired prosecutor, leaned over and whispered to the person beside him. This girl didn't come to be acquitted. She came to end their game. Desi listed precisely 3 fundamental errors in Donnelly's arrest report: incorrect timestamp, lack of an independent witness, and mishandled evidence. She then pointed out 2 procedural violations: failure to read Miranda rights and an unlawful search without a warrant. And finally, one particularly grave offense: forcing the defendant's head onto a scorching hot car hood constitutes intentional assault, violating Article 4 of the Kentucky Juvenile Protection Act. Every word hit like a nail driven into an indictment, not of her, but of the system that enabled such acts. Desi's voice wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but carried a weight that silenced all previous mockery, like ash in the rain. Donnelly sat in the witness box, his face flushed, jaw clenched, his hand gripping the file folder as if he could crush something within it. But he didn't interrupt. He couldn't. When the session ended, the judge did not issue a verdict. He announced the hearing would resume next week. But Desi didn't need another week to say what she came to say. Before stepping down, she turned, eyes fixed on Judge Mallory. "Law is not meant to threaten the weak. It is meant to prevent the powerful from threatening citizens." Within less than 12 hours, the court footage clip spread across social media at record speed. 3.2 million views, 612,000 shares. The phrase, "the girl who needed no lawyer," trended simultaneously on Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. But Desi read none of the comments. She posted no status. She didn't thank her supporters. She left the courthouse with her cloth satchel, went home, turned on her desk lamp, and opened another thick file. Procedural violations by officers on 82nd Street, 2015 to present. Because to her, this battle was never just about clearing her name. It was about exposing every shadow they'd hidden in the light of the law. Even before Desi understood what law was, she knew what loss meant. Liam Allen, her father, had once been a military legal officer, holding the rank of captain, praised by the Pentagon for investigating corruption within the military logistics system. But he didn't die on the battlefield, nor did he fall during an overseas mission. He died in his own home, on a March afternoon, just hours after submitting an internal report accusing budget misconduct and collusion between certain local police officers and weapons contractors. The official cause of death recorded was slipped on the stairs, fatal cranial trauma. But there were no scene photos, no bloodstains matching a fall. That death passed in silence. No investigation, no follow-up. No one is held accountable. Daisy was only 12 at the time, and all she knew was that her father had stopped showing up at the dinner table, where he used to explain constitutional clauses as if they were fairy tales. 5 years later, on a summer night while rearranging a bookshelf knocked over by a draft, Desi accidentally discovered a hard object slipping out from the spine of Federal Criminal Procedure, 2002 edition. It was a small silver-gray USB drive. No label, no markings. She plugged it into her father's old computer, the one her mother kept as a keepsake. Inside was a 38-minute video, an off-the-record internal hearing, recorded in a small room, where her father, with a steady, firm voice, detailed how a $2.3 million budget was redirected to the wrong account, ending up in personal bank accounts of a group of local officers. At the 19th minute, he named one directly, Lieutenant Clinton Donnelly, then in charge of verifying forensic documentation and authorized to oversee records. The face of Donnelly in the video was younger by at least a decade, but the darting eyes and awkward silence were unchanged. Desi stared at the frame, unblinking. The scattered pieces in her mind began to assemble. Her father's death, Donnelly's baseless hostility, and the real reason why she had been targeted. Not because she was a stranger in the neighborhood, but because she carried the bloodline of someone who had once dared to speak up. She didn't scream. She didn't break things. Instead, she printed every document, numbered each page, and wrapped them in red covers. Each binder was around 60 pages, highlighted in yellow with the note, "Never lose this again." She categorized the contents, one on budget violations, one on internal connections, and one listing witnesses. Every line was arranged not by emotion, but by determination. In the small house on Maple West, where only she and her mother lived, no decorative paintings hung on the walls. Instead, there were framed copies of the U.S. Constitution, the First through 10th Amendments, and 3 historic court rulings: Brown v. Board of Education, Miranda v. Arizona, and Loving v. Virginia. Her mother, Miriam, was once a high school librarian. She was suspended in 2018 for refusing to remove books on racism and civil rights from the shelves. "If we erase painful history, future generations won't know how we survived," she said. In the Allen family, the dinner table was not a place for casual talk. It was where legal clauses were decoded. Desi grew up on breakfasts of hot tea and case law analysis. By age 13, she had already won a school case using just a 3-page essay, challenging a racially biased testing policy, a piece later used as teaching material in 3 neighboring districts. But this time, she knew. The game had left the schoolyard. What was happening now was no longer about honor, scholarships, or grades. It was about a truth buried under the label accident. And her opponent was no longer just those who didn't believe her, but the very system that had silenced her father forever. Desi never intended to apologize for understanding the law. She intended to use the law to force them to speak the truth they had tried to hide. 3 days after the first hearing, while the media lights still blazed outside her porch, Desi Allen began to realize she was no longer just a singular case. She was a threat. And something, or rather, someone, had begun to move in the shadows, determined to extinguish her light. That night, at exactly 2:03 a.m., her phone lit up. A message from an anonymous number flashed across the screen, visible for just 3 seconds before disappearing automatically. "Want to vanish like your father?" She sat up, not trembling, but keeping her hand on the phone. She knew this type of message. It wasn't a prank. It was a level L0 protocol threat. Something her father had once explained. Brief, untraceable, but with a very clear purpose: instill fear. She opened the security camera system on her front yard. Nothing. All data from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. was missing. Stranger still, only the segments covering the time of her arrest and return home had been deleted. All other footage functioned normally. It was a targeted edit. She wasn't surprised. Her father had predicted this. Under her desk's old wooden cabinet was a backup circuit, a secondary recording system he had installed alongside the main cameras years ago. She opened the panel, reattached the auxiliary hard drive, and just as she expected, the videos were intact. A person in police uniform, wearing gloves, had approached her house through the alley at 1:26 a.m. The next day, during lunch break, a student named Zion came to find her. Zion was well known at school as a reluctant hacker, suspended last year for unauthorized access to the teacher's Wi-Fi network. He handed Desi a USB drive. Inside was a transcript of a chat between two internal accounts, one of which matched an IP address from the 82nd Street Police Department network. "Take care of that girl. Don't let her make it to the next hearing." Desi showed no emotion. She archived the chat transcript in her private legal database, renaming the file. Section 7, B, Witness Intimidation. She made 3 copies of every piece of evidence, one stored on her computer, one encrypted in the cloud, and one on a portable hard drive tucked behind her copy of Federal Criminal Law. That afternoon, an anonymous Twitter account named at Last Clause sent a PDF file to her inbox. The file name, Memo KY Do J Confidential Scan.pdf. Inside was a memo sealed in red from the Kentucky Department of Justice, issued 5 years prior, warning of manipulation within the investigative system in the area where Donnelly had once served. Even more notable, the original whistleblower named in the memo, Liam Allen. Within 48 hours, from Reddit to Black Twitter, threads exploded with titles like, "She didn't scream, she made the law listen." "Desi Allen isn't a suspect, she's living proof of injustice." Clips of Desi's courtroom cross-examination spread online, edited with the song Glory by John Legend. Over 6 million views. But she didn't celebrate. That night, her mother, Miriam, quietly placed an old leather notebook in front of Desi. She said nothing, only touched the spine gently. When Desi opened it, hundreds of handwritten entries emerged. The ink faded with time. Names, locations, file numbers, manipulated incidents, missing witnesses. She said, not loudly, "If you're strong enough to open it, you're strong enough not to back down." Desi nodded. No more tears, no more fear, only pages, evidence, and one unwavering truth. She was no longer investigating an arrest. She was unraveling a web of power, each thread leading back to where her father had once stood and fallen. And this time, they wouldn't silence her. She was no longer just a girl reading at a bus stop. Desi Allen was a living mind, a living record, and the one illuminating what the darkness thought it had buried for good. Second hearing, Monday morning, 9 a.m. Courtroom number 4 was packed, not only with residents, but also with journalists, civil rights organizations, and individuals who had once crossed paths with Donnelly or the 82nd Street Police Department, yet never received justice. Desi Allen, 17 years old, stood at the presentation stand, not as a defendant, but as a full-fledged prosecutor. She wore a navy blue blazer, her hair pulled into a high bun, unadorned, yet radiating a determination that commanded the attention of the entire room. On the screen, she displayed a satellite map collected by a commercial geospatial data service from the exact moment she was arrested. The data showed clearly the actual location of the bus stop was 48.3 meters away from the scene reported by Clinton Donnelly, a margin of error too significant to ignore, especially under Article 12.4b of Kentucky's Penal Code. Any evidence collected from that misreported location, by law, must be entirely dismissed. She didn't speak much. She simply looked straight at Clinton Donnelly, the man who had just taken the witness stand. Her voice was calm, but sharp as a scalpel. "Do you know my father, Liam Allen? If not, why are you the one who signed for his internal investigation report in 2016? The courtroom fell silent. A wave of murmurs rippled outward like water spilling from a glass. Desi pulled out an old file, laminated. Its ink faded. She held up a fax, dated June 18, 2016, titled, Preliminary Evidence of Military Budget Misconduct, addressed to the State Department of Internal Affairs. The recipient's signature, Lieutenant Clinton Donnelly. A television camera zoomed in on his expression. His face pale, lips tightly pressed, collar soaked in sweat. He stammered, I don't recall. Maybe someone else used my access code. But Desi didn't give him time to wriggle out. She moved to an audio recording, retrieved from the police station's internal recording system, restored from a backup storage unit her father had once designed. Clinton Donnelly's voice rang out unmistakably. This girl needs to be put in her place, needs to know where she belongs. The courtroom was dead silent. Then, a woman in the back row, a former social worker, let a tear slip down her cheek. A prominent legal blogger present that day wrote on Twitter, "She isn't just a witness, she's a living indictment, carrying both the blade and the light." In that moment, the balance of the room shifted. It was no longer the police accusing a black teenage girl. It was a black teenage girl systematically peeling off the mask of a system that had operated on deceit. Judge Stephen Mallory paused mid-swing of his gavel. He looked at Desi for a long time, not with the condescending gaze he'd worn during the first hearing, but with a wariness tinged with confusion. Because he knew, from this moment on, if he delivered a false ruling, all the evidence would turn against his professional integrity. Clinton Donnelly's hands began to visibly tremble. The hairs at his temples clung to his sweat-soaked skin. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support. But no one stood with him now. Even his colleagues at the precinct, who had once blindly defended him, now avoided his gaze. Desi stepped toward the screen. Holding a laser pointer, she highlighted each item in her slide presentation. The location discrepancy, arrest procedure violations, manipulated camera data, and finally, the connection between Clinton Donnelly and her father's death. Each time she spoke, the truth carved deeper into the shell of power. This isn't the first trial, she concluded, eyes locked on the jury. But I believe it's the first trial where the system itself must answer. No one applauded, no one needed to, because truth, when presented correctly, requires no cheer. It echoes on its own. And that day, its echo began to shake, not just the four walls of the courtroom, but the very foundation of what had once been thought unshakable. Day 3 of the trial. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. The mocking laughter from the first day was gone, replaced by caution, even held breath. The media packed every row, not to report anymore, but to witness a collapse. And the one removing each brick of power was none other than a 17-year-old black girl. But today, another figure appeared, a man who had once been the shadow of the one who oppressed her. Otis Trent, a veteran officer, 23 years in the force. 15 of them spent side by side with Clinton Donnelly, the same man who once stood before the cameras during the 2019 medal ceremony and declared, "Donnelly is a man of action. He doesn't back down, doesn't bow." But today, walking into the courtroom in a navy blue uniform with no badge on his chest, Otis Trent seemed to have left part of his former self at the door. He stood at the witness stand, gripping the microphone with both hands, as if afraid his words were about to shatter something. Then he began, not with grandstanding, but with a single sentence. "I saw Donnelly falsify an arrest report, and I stayed silent. That was my fault." Pens stopped. Keyboards fell quiet. In that moment, the entire courtroom froze. Not from surprise, but because finally, someone from within the system had stepped into the light. Otis spoke of a night in 2020 when he and Donnelly stopped a 14-year-old boy in a hoodie standing outside a convenience store at the corner of Maple Street. No violation. No profanity. Just existence. Donnelly had said, "These kids were born to be documented." Otis lowered his head, his voice choked. I drove home that night, unable to look my wife in the eye. The same woman who once worked with black children, swallowed whole by this system. Desi Allen said nothing. She just looked at him, not with blame, not with hatred. Just a nod for a man who dared to turn back on a road very few dare to stop walking. Otis didn't stop there. He submitted a file containing 3 reports that Donnelly had altered, changing arrest times, adding fabricated statements from an anonymous witness, and deleting complaint responses from victims. All of them had been backed up by Otis on a hard drive he never thought he'd have to use. He turned to Donnelly, now no longer the image of a model officer, but a shrunken figure, eyes downcast to the floor, wrists visibly trembling. Otis said, "I'm not here to apologize to you. I'm here to sever the complicity I once helped to sustain." The silence in the courtroom was no longer one of shock. It was relief. A heavy stone had just been lifted from the chests of many who had long been crushed by this system. Otis's testimony video went viral just 20 minutes later. It was titled, "The Blue Dagger, the blade that pierced the blue line." The emblem of the police force, the thin blue line, had now been slashed from the inside. Within 3 hours, a Change.org petition titled, "Reinvestigate all 82nd Street cases," had gained over 114,000 signatures. And it didn't stop there. The hallway outside the courtroom grew longer. A quiet line began to form. The woman was once arrested for protesting an eviction. The man who lost his job due to a falsified record. The little girl was once labeled a non-compliant subject, just for crying too loudly when she was pulled from her mother. They stood in line. No one forced them. No one needed to protect them. Because for the first time, a 17-year-old girl had shown that the system wasn't a wall of bricks, but something that could tremble if you dared to touch it. And it was Desi Allen, with her razor-sharp silence, her calm courage, who did what people decades older than her never dared to do. Force a powerful man to answer, and make those who once defended him begin to question themselves. Otis Trent was the first, but he would certainly not be the last. Wednesday morning, day 5 of the trial. The scene outside District Court number 12 was no longer crowded and chaotic. It was a silent gathering, weighted with gravity. The media stood on the sidelines. Cameras recorded quietly. And then, an elderly woman with silver hair and a wooden cane stepped onto the courthouse steps. She looked straight into a phone camera and spoke, unedited. "I saw that girl get arrested that day. I was standing just 10 meters away. But I didn't do anything. I was afraid. Today, I'm not afraid. Today, I speak." Her name was Rosalind Decker, 72 years old, a former history teacher right here in the Hill Ridge area. She continued speaking about what she had seen, about the screams swallowed by authority, and the eyes on the street that pretended to see nothing. Her clip spread rapidly, surpassing 800,000 shares in under 6 hours. But the remarkable thing wasn't the number, it was the wave she ignited. Within 48 hours of the video, 7 other witnesses came forward at the court clerk's office to volunteer their testimony. A taxi driver named Jerome, once arrested by Donnelly in 2017 for illegal parking, though traffic cameras proved otherwise. A high school student, Kenyatta, 16, who brought an old phone containing a video of an arbitrary body search on the school field after class. A supermarket employee who had seen Clinton Donnelly demand to search a young black girl's backpack because her eyes wouldn't meet his, Each person came with a puzzle piece, a memo, an old photo, a recording. Fragments that had no voice alone, but when laid side by side, they formed a communal indictment. Among the youth who spoke up was an 11th grader named Samira Lopez, who created a website called We Were Here, a digital map marking random searches without official cause, mainly targeting Black students in Hill Ridge and 3 neighboring districts. In less than a week, the map showed 42 red dots, each marking a location where unusual treatment had occurred, from schoolyards, hallways, and principals' offices to even cafeterias. The movement started with one post, but then it spread like fire in the summer wind. Students at no fewer than 9 city high schools simultaneously petitioned their administrations to print Miranda rights, the right to know the reason for arrest and the right to remain silent, into student handbooks alongside the school code of conduct. An emergency school board meeting was held in response to over 2,700 student signatures demanding mandatory teaching of civil rights, legal protections, and procedures when interacting with police in the civics curriculum. At the same time, photos of Desi in the courtroom, standing with the Constitution in hand, citing statutes like cannon fire against a fortress of oppression, were chosen for the cover of the Global Human Rights Law Journal. The headline was short, but thunderous: "The Girl Who Made the System Listen." Social media exploded with posts and commentary. From handcuffs to dismantling the structure of oppression. 17, and she forced generations to face their past. And we let a teen do the job of the entire legal system. These weren't just attention-grabbing headlines. They were wake-up calls. In a small bedroom at the end of Cypress Street, Desi Allen had no Twitter, no Instagram, and no notifications. She didn't know that Rosalind's clip had entered the national trending top 5. She didn't know that the hashtag number Desi Did Not Flinch had been used by over 4.6 million people. She was simply sitting beside an old wooden desk in front of a pinboard, crowded with post-it notes, maps, and linked timelines. She was rereading her father, Liam Allen's, internal investigation files. A section had been blacked out with permanent ink, a line erased, but she was reconstructing each letter using a handwriting recognition algorithm, because she knew all the testimony, all the movements, all the headlines would be nothing more than temporary echoes if the final blow wasn't struck. And that final blow was the truth behind her father's death, a truth the system had buried. But Desi, with each cold and deliberate step, was unearthing it. Not for revenge, but to clear the ground where justice had once been buried alive. The final hearing didn't take place in a grand courtroom with cameras pointed at every corner. There was no dramatic verdict, no gavel striking with finality. Instead, it was an emergency meeting room where the district prosecutor, the state's internal affairs inspector, representatives from the Department of Justice, and an independent investigation unit sat around a long oak table. The atmosphere was stifling, not from a lack of oxygen, but because no one dared to breathe too deeply. And Desi Allen walked in. No escort, no lawyer, no microphone. In her hand was only a dark red folder with a leather-bound spine, hand-stitched, and a small USB drive clipped to the keychain her father had carried with him since 2003. She offered no introduction, no opening accusations. She simply placed the folder in the center of the table and said, clearly and firmly, "Supplementary evidence. Source: lawful property of the late Captain Liam Allen, military investigator, ID number 417BQT. She slid the USB toward the technical coordinator. The main screen lit up. A stream of data appeared. Internal interview videos, reports from the military police force, and notably, an 18-page document bearing the digital signatures of 3 regional commanders, accusing Clinton Donnelly of directly tampering with evidence in at least 4 federal cases. She turned to page 13, pointed to a passage. The crime scene map submitted by Lieutenant Donnelly does not match military GPS data. Discrepancy, 47.8 meters. Manual interference suspected. The entire room went silent. She continued. This is the same schematic Donnelly used to reconstruct the scene in my case. Discrepancy, 47.8 meters. The same discrepancy found in a 2012 military investigation led by my father, the final case before his death. One member of the investigation unit asked, barely louder than a whisper, "Where did you find this evidence?" Desi didn't look up. She answered, "In the spine of the book, Federal Criminal Procedure, my father gave me before he died. I didn't know it was there until the wind knocked the bookshelf over." She pointed at the screen, footage showing Donnelly tearing up an internal report in a private room, filmed by a device he never knew her father had installed. Then she pulled the final page from the red folder. A handwritten letter. Liam Allen's handwriting. Ink faded, paper yellowed with age. If you're reading this, it means the truth did not surface on its own. Then let reason, not anger, guide you. Let justice be seen not through shouting, but through evidence that cannot be denied. Everyone bowed their heads. Clinton Donnelly sat still. His hands rested on his thighs. His collar was soaked through. He looked up at her, no longer with resentment, no longer with authority, only with the collapse of a man who once believed himself untouchable. He spoke just 3 words. I remained silent. And Desi tilted her head. Her eyes were steady. Her voice sank low. Now tell me, who needs defending? No one in the room laughed. No one clapped. Not even the media sensationalized it afterward. Because that moment needed no applause, it needed to be remembered. Desi turned and walked out of the room. Her mother was waiting in the hallway. But Desi didn't cry. She said nothing. She didn't need an "I'm sorry," because what she had sought was not forgiveness, but a system that would stop concealing its sins. As she stepped outside, the afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the narrow path leading to the gate. She gripped the red folder tightly, walking past silent reporters, bowed citizens, and children wearing shirts printed with her quoting the law, like a living monument. And before the bus arrived, she sat on the old wooden bench, opened her book, and began reading again. The Fourth Amendment. Not because she didn't already know it, but because someone will always need to hear it again, louder, clearer, without trembling. Because justice has no face, it only has a voice, and today, that voice bore the name D.C. Allen. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see how the fight continues.